Welcome to another episode of the Conscious Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Raymond. Today, I'm speaking with Tovi Scruggs-Hussein, a visionary leader and healer with over 30 years of experience in education, emotional intelligence, and racial healing. Today, Tovi shares with us her personal and highly impactful journey that starts with the loss of her mother at a young age, which then propelled her into a life of high achievement and service, yet left her searching for deeper fulfillment. Her discovery of meditation and the importance of self-awareness became the foundation for her work in emotional intelligence and leadership. In her work, Tovi emphasizes the power of rest, mindfulness, and being rather than just doing as essential practices for entrepreneurs who want to lead with compassion and authenticity. In this episode, we jump into how Tovi's practice of meditation shaped her leadership philosophy, the significance of racial healing in creating inclusive environments, and the necessity of embracing ease and rest as components of sustainable success. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Tovi Scruggs-Hussein. Hey, Tovi, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
It is great to be here with you.
I'm excited to talk to you. There's a lot of things on my list of questions for you about how we as entrepreneurs approach our lives, our being, the challenges of resting, and meditation as a practice. These are all things that are really important for us to get right as entrepreneurs. And before we get into the conversation today, I would love it if we could talk a little bit about your journey and what has drawn you into the work that you do today around meditation, emotional intelligence, bias, DEI work, courageous leadership. Tell us a little bit about this number of things that are your passions and what brought you here.
Thank you so much for asking me to share on that, Alex. It's funny. It always sounds like a number of things, and even to me, and yet it is such an integration. It's been 30 years of integrating these different things that are important to me that really do stem from my journey of losing my mother to AIDS when she was only 36 years old. And I was, 14 on the verge of 15 years old. And this was 1986. This was a time that Black women didn't have AIDS. This was considered a gay white man's disease back then. And being on the journey with her through what I call her death and dying journey, but also into learning to live, shaped me greatly. And seeing the grace and the depth of her spirituality as she went on to accept dying and leaving me behind. And I became someone really attached to performativity from that. She was preparing me for a world without her, for life without her. And by the time I hit college, I was pretty much on autopilot of just succeed, do better than everyone else, do what you can, be successful. I got through UC Berkeley in 3 years with 2 degrees.
Wow.
Right. I was on a mission. And I went into teaching. And I realized that something was very unhealed in me. I was looking great from the outside. Life was going well, but I wasn't feeling whole. I wasn't feeling at peace. And I was blessed at the age of 22, being a brand new teacher, to meet an African medicine woman who connected me with meditation and connected me with a holistic view of life, and that we are our own healers. And that through meditation, when she literally said, you need to go sit and breathe, that was it. That opened the whole everything to me. It opened me up to me. It opened the world up to me. It opened deeper relationships. And that was when the journey of my 30-year daily meditation practice began, was just sitting and breathing. So it's kind of interesting too. I'm a purist when it comes to meditation. I don't need a lot of visualization. and things like that. But it started my healing journey. It cracked me open to be able to deal with what was in me and on my heart. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, self-awareness and self-regulation are the foundations that comes from meditation. When we talk about resilience and courage, the foundations of those are self-awareness. And meditation is the key form of cultivating one's self-awareness. And so it really just impacts our embodiment, and it impacts how we lead, how we work in our businesses. It impacts everything. So that's where it started from the root, and it branches off into all those things that you named.
Wow, so that's a really meaningful experience for you to have that, and so this really this opened your eyes. This is something that you said, "Wow, I have a tool here to help me better understand myself." What is it about your practice? What is it about meditation that leads to higher levels of self-awareness and self-regulation?
It has been learning to just cultivate what I call my beingness, which is what has been huge in transforming from leadership doing to leadership being, anchoring to my own embodiment of the inner and outer expression. Our beingness is our expression in the inner sense and the outer sense. It's that felt sense, that feeling tone. Some folks in the New Age world might call it our vibration, but it's the felt sense of who we are is what our beingness is. And it's your energy being expressed. It impacts everything. And I often will ask people, how do you want to be experienced as a leader? And then they may list certain qualities, or how do you want people to experience you in your business? And these qualities can be cultivated first and foremost by intention, right? I want to be experienced, for example, more peacefully. So then how do we sit and cultivate peace from within? And how do we trust that felt sense of the feeling connection to something greater than ourselves to lead us on a path to cultivating peace within? And once we can cultivate that peace within, then it becomes palpable for others. And then it becomes something that we've transformed within ourselves that we can support in transforming for others.
And so I want to get into this idea of leadership, and I want to understand more your background and your concepts here. But help us connect the dots a little bit. So from learning how to meditate when you were 22, from this medicine woman that you described, until now, where has this led you? What are the things that you have then brought to the world as a result of what you learned?
It has really taught me to cultivate greater compassion for others. I entered my professional career as a formal educator, so a teacher, then an assistant principal, then a principal. I even had my own private school for about 8 years. And what I was finding was that we lacked connection with each other. And when I went on to become a principal at a formal high school, the staff was like 96% white, and the student body was 96% students of color. And there was a deep sense of cultural disconnect. There wasn't a lack of love. There wasn't a lack of, I'm here to serve you and support you. And there definitely it wasn't centered even around racism. And I know it's hard for some people to even hear that word, but I name that word because oftentimes when we think of the cultural disconnect, we think about racism. And it's deeper than that. It's an actual disconnection to self. Racism is a disconnection from self because it's not even really real at the end of the day. It's a learned behavior. It's a learned ideology. If we can learn it, we can unlearn it. And I propose that we unlearn it by deepening connection to self, which then allows us to deepen connection to others. And so these biases that we may hold are actually really carefully taught in us for either safety, protection, a passing down of ideas that are antiquated. But if we're not aware of this disconnection and how it breeds itself in us, then we can't uproot it. We can't even have the disconnection so that we can have a reconnection, if you will. And we come from being anchored into our own conditioning. And so, long story short, to answer your question, we have to absolutely cultivate this self-connection that then leads to compassion. And that is what has saved me. Being able to fall in love with the people that I serve and the people that I lead, and seeing them for more than the skin that they're in, but seeing them in this presence, if you will, of one human wanting to serve another human.
And so how did you make the leap from being an educator and an administrator principal into doing this work around emotional intelligence and equity that you're doing today?
I thought meditation and the work of emotional intelligence was just something that was personal to me. And then as the practice started transforming me, I was seeing how it was applicable to leadership and to how we serve others, and how it deepened our relationships through our own sense of self-awareness. Sometimes as leaders, we are the trigger right. for our staff. We're the trigger for our teams. But if we don't know our trigger, how we're triggering to others, if we're not fully aware of what's happening in us as we're being engaged with others, then it limits us as leaders. It limits us in being aware of the felt sense of how people are experiencing us, and really being able to turn on a dime. Like when you cultivate that sense of leadership presence and skillfulness within yourself, it serves as an antenna in the room, if you will. Being able to, in a sense, what people might say, read the energy in the space, right? Because your energy is now being integrated with the energy that's in the room, and there's an exchange that's happening. Are you properly reading the discomfort in the space? Are you properly agitating or not agitating? Like, you can use agitation as a tool, right, to bring out greater truth in a space, but you can also use it to minimize. And when I say agitate, I don't mean to be like an annoyance, but agitate as in to disrupt or create a dissonance in order to serve resonance for where you're taking people. So there's even a healing and transformative process that stems from our leadership when we're being skillful.
Well, this is a big deal, and this comes up a lot for entrepreneurs who are either trying to build their own skills or to cultivate their leaders within their companies. And we spend so much of the time focusing on, what do I need to do as a leader? What are the skills I need to have? And, I need to learn how to be a good communicator and a good delegator and organized and whatever, all these, many, many things, which are basically the things I need to be doing in my approach, as opposed to ways of being. And so you're really talking about this from the point of view that says, who am I as a person, as I am a leader or as I am an entrepreneur? Tell us a little bit about that philosophy, this leadership being philosophy. It's very different from other leadership models that I've heard. It's really something that goes many layers deeper than what we might think of as like classic leadership training or anything like that.
I'm glad that you're picking up on what I'm putting down. So I'm glad that that's making sense. We really can't teach what we don't embody. And so we're caught up in the doing. We're caught up in the technical aspects of things. And again, sometimes being even on this hamster wheel of, oh, this is what leaders do. This is what coaches do. This is what entrepreneurs do. But we absolutely act and behave from who we be. That's what influences and impacts our doing. So if we're not conscious of who we be, and say we want to be a more inclusive leader, if we're not conscious of what needs to be healed and transformed within us where we're not inclusive, then how do our policies and practices create inclusion? We're really not able to do that because our lens is so limited because we haven't shifted that within ourselves. And so that's why I go on to say that a lot of the doing that happens feels very technical. It can feel disconnected from our values. If I value love and self-empowerment, but the spaces that I create don't reflect that, there's a disconnect there from who I be and what I do.
And burnout is just around the corner from that. So when there is that disconnect, burnout is literally the next step there because I'm not living how I want to be living.
Exactly. And actually I believe that we burn out because we make our living and leading so difficult. It's really going against the grain of who we are. So it's almost like this grinding of a clutch or grinding of gears versus this flow and a smoothness and an alignment. And, people hear, oh, you're burnt out, you need to rest. We struggle with resting because resting is not doing. Yes, it's a list of kind of like things to do, but it requires you really to do nothing. Resting requires a stillness and a surrender that all I can really tell you, Alex, is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable.
It is. I mean, all of my friends will say the same thing, that after we unplug for whatever the period of time is, a day up to maximum of like a week or two, everybody gets antsy and they want to go, do stuff as opposed to just being unplugged. But before we get into the rest, I have a question I want to ask you, which is, why aren't we more comfortable with just letting things flow?
I would say this because we have limited emotional stamina and it's not even limited ability. The capacity and the ability is so there. Like we're designed for flow. We have limited practice in allowing for flow and allowing for just being, for us slowing down and just allowing ourselves to give ourselves what we need in the moment. We actually are conditioned, right, to perform, conditioned to do. And we're often looking at our to-do list, not from a place of what we want to flow in. It's not inspired action. It's often not inspired creative action. Even when we work for ourselves, we have this list of things to do that often goes against the grain of how we want to be. And we have to start to redefine for ourselves what's important. What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be wealthy? All these things that I think that we're conditioned for, that makes us keep grinding and doing. Whereas when can enough be enough so that I know that I'm working just enough?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's so much conditioning there. And one of the ones that comes up for me is this idea of like a struggle mindset, meaning it's not worth it unless I had to fight for it, unless I had to struggle for it. And so I've been reframing that with a lot of the stuff that I've learned actually through doing this podcast and Conscious Entrepreneur Summit and stuff like that. Reframing to allow things in my life and to allow flow into my life. And there's actually a couple of Post-it notes on my monitor here. One of which says, "It's okay for things to be easy," because this is not my natural state of being. My natural state of being is, if it's worth it, it's got to be hard, and I have to have fight and struggle and all this sort of stuff in order for it to work. Another one says that 2024, so this year, 2024, will be the most fun, creative year I've had yet. And so those are things that I'm kind of trying to bring into my life, but because they're not natural to me, I literally have to have Post-it notes on my monitor to remind me of these things.
You are not alone, Alex. It's like I teach and preach this, and I still have, decades of reconditioning to train myself in this sense of ease. And it's interesting that we're talking about ease because that for me has been huge for 2024 as well. And my affirmation that just came to me in the last 6 weeks is easier is better.
Easier is better.
Easier is better. And like, can we really believe that after being trained that, you have to put in hard work? And, part of my area of expertise is racial healing. So I do bring a racialized lens and consciousness into a lot of my conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to name that there's even a deeper layer for me as a Black woman choosing ease as I'm working on my own self-empowerment and my own self-healing and self-transformation, that I was raised that I had to work twice as hard just to have what my white counterparts could do or have, right? Mm-hmm. So even having, and that was taught to me out of love. That was taught to me out of love. And yet here I am having to heal from that belief and balance out, okay, when is enough? And can I allow for ease? And can it be easy to obtain what I have? And the answer is unapologetically yes, because we have our gifts. And when we're operating in our gifts and when we're bringing those to the forefront, ease is like the byproduct. Like my work is play. I love what I do. And why can't I make my own work that I love and do easy? So I've had to start reorchestrating my life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much Gay Hendricks' definition of zone of genius is when your work becomes play and when things become easy. But I want to understand this more deeply. So you were taught you've got to work twice as hard to get there, and so you embody this as a young woman. You're then out there feeling like you're constantly behind, scrambling, needing to not only prove yourself, but do twice as much work just to feel like you're staying even with everyone else. When did you start to give that up? What were the things that were happening that made you say, okay, hey, maybe I don't need to have this belief with me anymore?
It's definitely a work in progress. I would say I've more diligently been looking at that for the last 3 years. And to say that is wow, okay, you teach this stuff and you're talking about 3 years. Our, what I call reacculturation is going to take time. And I would say maybe almost a year per decade. But, that kind of goes against the grain too, that you can just really do some good reprogramming and you could be on the other side. But I think it amounts to the attention that we give it, the attention and the intention. And what I love the process of self-transformation and healing. And so I treat it like an experiment. So even the act, if you will, of sometimes drawing it out in a way is a way for me to examine it and explore it and to keep digging deeper and pulling the layers of the onion back. And so I am more easeful. And as I'm more easeful, it also causes me to look at, okay, is something being given up to be more easeful? And I'm starting to really realize that the way that I want to monetize my life and the way that I want to assess my own success and my experience is with the amount of freedom and joy that I have. How much freedom and joy
nice
can I have and do I need? Yeah.
I have to say that I am not very fluent at all in the racial conversations. It's an area where I'm uncomfortable. I don't have a lot of Black friends. I don't feel like I have a good, reasonable contribution to make here. And so even when you're talking about this, I feel myself being like, oh, I don't know what to say. I'm a white man. What do I say? I don't even know what to do. And by the way, I'm saying that, and I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I think there are many people who are like that. And I would love it if you would share, how does one open up to that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And it's the same muscle in the way that we grow ourselves as entrepreneurs and in our consciousness and want to be a conscious a conscious entrepreneur and want to be a conscious leader, Alex, it's really the same process. It's just an area of focus. So are you choosing to focus on cultural growth, on cultural agility? The first and primary thing is that being with self, like the courage that you've just taken to name this publicly is huge. And that's like the biggest first step in so many ways, is just naming that here I am in this white body, and this is the consciousness or lack thereof that I'm holding around in this area, right? And then you can start to look at, that's where meditation really comes in beautifully. What are some of the things that you have taught? Like I have this free ebook that takes people through their racialized story of their own healing and identity. What is your racialized story and your autobiography? How were you raised to look at race? How were you raised to look at other people that you engage with? What were you taught about Black people? Like, these are the questions to start to ask yourself. When were you first exposed to knowing that you were white and other people were not? Like, right? And so sometimes those stories are so dormant in us that meditation offers this beautiful gateway. And this is really how I brought meditation into a professional setting, Alex. So I'm glad you let us back here. Because it was meditation that I shared with my staff after having years of practice with it under my own belt, that allowed them to look at the parts of themselves that I called the ugly parts of ourselves. To look at the ugly parts of ourselves in private. Like, no one knows what's happening to you when you're sitting there, right? You can be having all these racist thoughts. You can be thinking about, oh, my uncle taught me this and my grandmother did this. And I remember the pain that I felt when I couldn't bring my Black friend home. Like, whatever is happening, you have the skills to unpack that within yourself. And so you start to expose that for yourself, and then it may lead to journaling. Then it may lead to you having a conversation with a family member or a conversation with a friend, and starting to articulate this learning that's happening within you, and you being able to have this experience that is deeply personal, but is supporting your healing and your transformation, that will eventually allow you to work with other people differently. Like, we talk about all these people we want to work with, but we have to have a cultural aptitude to work with other clients and other people. And so a lot of the work I do allows coaches and entrepreneurs to deepen their cultural awareness so that they can connect to other clients in a way that doesn't say, you know what, I'm walking in your shoes, but in a way that says, I can connect to that pain.
I think curiosity is such an important thing here too, absolutely. Right? Is saying, hey, I don't know what it's like to have this experience, but I'd like to learn about it. And to me, this takes me back to the concept of bias. Like, what kind of biases am I holding? And I know that you've done quite a lot of work on interrupting bias, or another way you put it is excavating bias. How does that help us be better leaders?
Well, it allows us to explore our conditioning, and when we can identify our biases, it's like a superpower. I tell people all the time, if you don't know your biases, you're scary to me, because you can't interrupt what you're not aware of, right? And so as we deepen our awareness, we start to become aware of a somatic response or a belief response to someone who may be different than us. And it can be beyond race. It can be gender. It can be class, right? It can be sexual. It can just run the gamut of what biases we hold. And often there's more than one. And often they are intersectional. So this excavation of the bias begins with being able to have that self-awareness, and then the ability to interrupt the bias so that we don't act on it. So to me, at our age, we're never going to get rid of the bias. That's not going to happen. The neurological pathways are too ingrained, but we can interrupt it. That's something that we can absolutely do. And there's a webinar that I have that's really beautiful in my sacred approach of emotionally intelligent equity and inclusion. No blame and shame. It just allows the person to engage in this self exploration and this self excavation to do this bias work on their own.
So what does that look like specifically? So how do I interrupt a bias if I notice it arising?
I call it awareing. So how are you engaging in awareing? And it's a framework that really allows you to go into your deeper self-knowing and your deeper emotional intelligence. And so what happens is, as we're sitting in meditation, we start to practice this concept of exploring our own conditioning. What's my lens? What are my beliefs? How has this led me to behave in the world and engage with others in the way that I do? What experiences am I having? So the curiosity piece comes in by exploring and being with those questions. The awareing is the awareness of what is arising right nowing. Yes, I made up that word. What is the awareness of what is arising right nowing? It's a whole framework I have there on my website. And you're paying attention as all this is happening, and then you're engaging in what I call this dual awareness. So while this is happening inside of you, you become aware of what's happening outside of you at the exact same time. And with practice, you can skillfully navigate what's happening both within you and manage what's happening outside of you so that there's a smooth and flowing interplay that is there that allows you to be responsive to the space and responsive to yourself so that you're skillful. You're skillful in your leadership. You're skillful in your coaching. You're skillful in whatever space you are holding. And we are built to be able to do this because it is a felt sense, feeling tone of this inner and outer expression. It is your embodiment. Yeah.
I want to pivot and ask about emotional intelligence. So the self-awareness that you talked about, self-regulation, these are tools that one can use to develop and maintain emotional intelligence. Meditation is the foundation of that, and some of the things that are going to come up are going to be things like bias. There's a lot of conversation, and we all hear the word so often, emotional intelligence. What's your definition of that? How do you put it into action? And I know you have your own specific model around this. Tell us about that.
I define emotional intelligence as our ability to be skillful and agile as we work with what arises in us. And while there are parts of emotional intelligence that focus purely on the self, there are 3 other areas that focus on the external, the engagement with others, the connection to others, responsible decision-making, values-based decision-making, right? All these things that have to do with our inner self having this outer impact. And so it's critical as we work with our emotional intelligence that we look at it in terms of how is it being displayed daily. So through conversation reflects our emotional intelligence. Can we take that sacred pause? Can we take that deep breath to stop and think about what we're going to say before we say it? Can we have enough awareness of others, of how to engage? So for instance, when you talked about being a white-bodied man who hasn't explored race much in his life, that was an automatic piece of information for me that lets me know how far can I go with Alex without getting him triggered and outside of his zone of growth. because I want Alex to be my ally, but I also need Alex to be my conscious ally in the work. So there is a racialized awareness and stamina that I would require of you to have to be in relationship together, meaning professionally, in relationship together. And in order to get you there, I can't push you so much that you're triggered and your amygdala becomes hijacked and you shut down from your own sense of awareness and go into a trauma response to protect your safety, which is really what happens when we don't have a strong sense of emotional intelligence as someone who's leading the space. And so that's where that skillfulness comes in. And that, again, is where the nuance and the layers to this play into a lived cultural experience, but also a leadership experience.
And so it's part of the idea here that the emotional intelligence allows me to be very perceptive and aware of everyone's growth zone, as you were saying it. So, we want to get out of the comfort zone, but I don't want to be pushing people way too far away. And, I also don't want to be kind of too top down or dictatorial and stuff like that. I want people, if I'm an entrepreneur or a leader, I want people in their growth zone. So they're developing and growing on their own, but I need to have somewhat of an awareness so I can calibrate how I'm communicating and responding.
Exactly. That is very well said. Yes.
And then I want to come back to another thing, which is a lot of us white people want to understand what it means to be an ally. And then you specified conscious ally. Tell us more about what that looks and feels like.
In my framework, we have this piece around what we call a revolutionary ally. And a revolutionary ally is a conscious ally, meaning that you are a racially conscious white person, that you have a consciousness of what it means to talk about who you are in your whiteness and the relationship to that with non-white people. The courage to act on that as well, and to sometimes say the difficult things that need to be said. That allyship where courage will show up looks like if we're in a shared multiracial space and something not very positive happens to me as a Black woman, that you could interrupt it without that labor being mine to interrupt. So yeah, it didn't happen to you. You may have witnessed it, or you may have just felt it. And you may follow up in that moment, or you may follow up later. But the labor of correcting a systemic fault, if you will, doesn't have to fall on me as a Black woman, but that you're a conscious and courageous enough ally. And that is revolutionary for a lot of white people to be that courageous and to be that forthright and compassionate, because we want to grow past empathy. Empathy is where you can relate to the emotions that I would hold. You've probably been oppressed in some way. I don't know if you've been systemically oppressed, but you probably felt oppressed in some way. So you can relate to an emotion of oppression in some way, or an emotion of being made to feel less than, and what that means. But when you become compassionate, that is you going a step beyond the empathy and being able to take action in a way that is heartfelt and conscious and loving. That is going to create change.
I'll throw another word in there, which, and I know you've done a lot of work with Brene Brown, but the word that pops up to me there is courageous, right? So we go from empathetic or understanding, or kind of on the receiving end of something, or that sort of playing defense, saying I'm going to be courageous, I'm going to take a step, I'm going to take action, I'm going to do something more proactively. Tell us a little bit about how you think about courageous leadership.
Wow, courageous leadership is huge. It is definitely the future of leadership. If we're looking at dismantling structures that have created harm, and I'm going to take race off the table, a structure of performativity that is rooted in perfectionism instead of excellence creates harm. When we're asking people to not have an easeful work life balance experience, that's creating harm and toxicity. And when we're being courageous, we're leaning into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. That is what it means to be vulnerable. In Brené's work, she says you cannot be courageous without vulnerability at the core. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So to lean into uncertainty and risk, you have to be deeply connected to your emotional center so that you can manage the levels of uncertainty and risk, to be courageous, to take action. And so therefore, to me, at its core, to be a courageous leader relies on one to be deeply self-connected, deeply self-regulated, and anchored in their emotional intelligence capacity and competencies. You have to have a different level of skillfulness. And it requires us, the discomfort muscle has to be strengthened. And the only way you strengthen that muscle is through practice of being uncomfortable. It goes against everything intuitive because we want to keep ourselves safe. And so we have to know about our own zones of safety of where can I push and where can I be pushed? Because the muscle gets strengthened by practicing it, which means we have to practice being courageous to be courageous.
Now, what do you say to the entrepreneurs who, maybe they're just starting and they have this vision of the type of company that they want to create and the product or service that they want to offer and the people that they want to work with, and they want to get as much of this right the first time as possible, meaning they want to be a good leader, they want to be connected, they want to have high emotional intelligence, they want to be someone who's inspiring, they want to really have the culture dynamics within their company be as good as possible. Mm-hmm. How do you recommend they get started, or what do you recommend that they think about?
I feel like leadership is like parenting. It is on the job training. For first and foremost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Much like entrepreneurship. It's like we can only read so much about it. We can only take so many classes. You've got to put it into action and find your vibe and find what works for you. And so with that being said, part of what had me leave formal education as a principal, as a district leader, all those things, and go into entrepreneurship was so that I could bring these cutting edge practices back into education and give us the leadership development that I felt that we needed. I was tired of getting standards-based instruction or how to write people up, like things that to me, after being a principal for 10 years, didn't matter. I needed to know how to have hard conversations. I needed to know how to move the needle with resistors. I needed quality leadership development that was where I wanted to go, not for who I was in that moment. And so what I offer to your question is invest in yourself. Trust your own intuitive knowing into the leadership development that you need for you. And sometimes that's healing work. Sometimes that's transformational work. A lot of times it's mindset work. So all we be leads to what we do. And if we want to be a certain kind of leader, we have to invest in that beingness. We have to invest in ourselves as how we want to be experienced. And that can look different for a lot of different people. It can mean that you need some energy work for a while. It can mean that you need some consciousness work. It could mean that you need to meditate or go on a silent retreat. It can look like different things for different folks.
Tovi, that's really fantastic. And I want to thank you for what feels like a really healing conversation. And I can tell your energy and skills and talents in this area are not only affecting me, I suspect they're going to affect everyone who's listening to this conversation. And thank you for the encouragement and affirmation to focus on the being rather than just the doing. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much for joining me today, Tovi.
Thank you so much, Alex.